Hello everyone, I'm Sakaya. Welcome back to my channel. So, I kind of have this oddity lately, and it's probably just the algorithm messing with me. Because it feels like I see a lot of YouTube videos now that are talking about the 2024 handbook in a mostly negative way. And, it could be just one of those things where, it's new, so the algorithm is pumping it up. And of course, the way the algorithm works is, there's, you get just as much negative, in fact, I'd say negative engagement sometimes gets you more clicks and more ad revenue than just, a generic thing like, hey, here's this new thing. But I feel like I start watching some of these videos or reading some of these posts online, and it just strikes me as very odd because some of the things that they're talking about just don't seem relevant to the 2024 handbook. Like, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of reasons to not want to buy the 2024 handbook. I am not going to be here to defend Wizards of the Coast because, let's face it, they've done some really sketchy things lately. You can look up online and see that, they, send people to, strong arm others who, got a copy of this book early, and, it was a mistake on their part. But then they sent people to, fix their mistake, and, they just ended up strong arming them. And then that's not right, a company shouldn't do that. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like, well, one, I was going to buy this book anyway, because I like D&D. Like, it's hard for me to not be into D&D. And at the same time, it's like, when I talk about this book, I talk about it very mechanically. Again, like I'm not here to be the judge and arbiter of Wizards of the Coast. But at the same time, it's like, if they make a good game, I should be able to say, this is a good game, even in spite of all that other stuff. And if they make a bad game, I should be able to say, this is genuinely a bad game. Uh, but, I see, it's always the sensational, titles like, oh, this is the end of D&D, oh, this game is broken, oh, this game doesn't work, and I'm like, really? Especially compared to the old handbook? Okay, let's go over a few things here. In terms of mechanics. Like, again, I don't want to get into the politics of Wizards of the Coast. That's a whole separate topic, and maybe I'll handle that one day. But it's things like, people complaining about, the cleric and the warlock and the sorcerer now all getting their subclasses at level 3. And to me, that just seems weird because even they usually acknowledge that, like, it makes sense mechanically to just have everyone get their subclass at the same level. Um, but, people seem to complain about it. It's like, but why? Like, oh, okay, I'm sorry you're not that extra 5% special anymore. Like, it seems like such a silly thing to nitpick over. Because it's like, would you rather have a game that's realistic? I know, realistic fantasy game, such a strange thing to say. Or do you want a game that works well mechanically, and then you can just flavor around it? And to me, I think I always want the latter, because, when it comes to games, like, whether it's a video game, whether it's a TTRPG, the more realistic you get, the less fun it tends to be. Because if you're going to make a game that's realistic, look at something one video was talking about how an older edition, which I'm going to admit I don't know a whole lot about older editions, but they were pointing out how in older editions, there were all these +1, -2, +3, -3 things. When determining what your bonus to your roll was going to be, it's like, okay, we'll cover grants you this. This condition is going to do this to you, and then it's going to, make that negative or positive. And when you think about it, it makes sense on paper. It's like you want this to be a realistic game. Like, it's not realistic if, someone hides behind cover and, there's just nothing to do, which, even in this edition, there's rules for cover. But you get my point. It's like, do you want to spend your time playing the game, or do you want to spend your time doing even more math? Because let's face it, even in base D&D, there's going to be a ton of math. So, on some level, you want it to represent what it's supposed to represent. You're supposed to have this fantasy, but at the same time, you also have to make it balanced so that it's not only fair but fun. Because it's not going to be fair if, like, the wizard, like, let's say you just took away wizard spell slots and they could just cast whatever whenever they want. That would be so ridiculously overpowered. It'd be, any martial class or any skill-based class would just be, completely useless because you would have your blade singers that can just blade sing all the time. Your wizard's like, oh, well, you don't need to pick the lock anymore because the wizard can just cast knock whenever he wants. So I feel it's a very disingenuous thing to, kind of poo-poo on this book just because it's less realistic. Is it realistic that, someone who's a sorcerer doesn't know their lineage at level 1, or someone who's made a pact with a being doesn't know who that being are level 1? No, it's not realistic, but it makes sense in terms of game balance. So this is an argument that I really just, when I hear it, I kind of roll my eyes and, move on. But I think it's one I see a lot, and I just don't think it's a genuine argument as to why this book is terrible. Some people have said, like, oh, some of these subclasses are really overpowered, and it's going to break the game. And I kind of want to go look at them and go, have you met the Twilight Cleric? Like, the Twilight Cleric is a thing in the old D&D, and it is ridiculously overpowered. It's like it is almost to the point of being broken. But the other thing you have to consider is that we don't have a new monster manual out yet. So it's quite possible, and hopefully this is true just for, the sake of DMs, that, the monsters are going to be a little stronger so that they can take that extra damage. They'll have more hit points. But, also not so strong that it just makes the combat, grind on. Because, again, you don't want combat to be over in an instant, but you also don't want combat to go forever. A combat that goes forever is not fun, because at this point it doesn't feel like you're fighting. It feels, it's kind of like a, Bethesda logic of what makes something hard, and, their answer is, oh, well, just give it more HP, and it's like, it doesn't make it fun to play on Legendary in Skyrim. It's a nice challenge, but it doesn't make it fun. It just makes it longer. And on top of that, D&D has always been an imperfect game. Because what D&D does is very open. This isn't like a video game where you can make the rules and limit what a character can do. The whole point of D&D is that you can do anything you can imagine, basically. If you want to do something insane, like, cut the rope that's tied to a chandelier and then use it to ride up, that's something you can do in D&D. That's something that you're really not going to see in video games, because that would require them to program a whole mechanic into the game. You don't want D&D to be like a video game where it heavily limits you for the sake of balance. You want D&D so that you can, play make-believe with your friends and have these power fantasies. And that's what it's about, and that's fine. But it's also a game where, because of that, and because of the way it works as a sort of collaborative storytelling engine, you really, it's one that has to be done in good faith. And this is why, like, people talk about min-maxing, especially in D&D, and, min-maxing can mean a lot of things, because I don't think a player who plays a wizard and, chooses a background that puts points into their intelligence and their constitution, that's not really min-maxing. I mean, it sort of is, because that's what you want to do for a wizard. A wizard wants to have a high intelligence so that their spells are more effective, and they want a high constitution so that they can make those constitution saving throws. That's not metagaming, that's not min-maxing, that's just how you make a wizard. But at the same time, like, you do have these min-maxers that, like, build their entire, character around, like, these one or two combos that are really powerful. And I don't think that's always fun. Like D&D Shorts did one, and then I saw another YouTuber, post about it, and they left out a lot of the context, and it was basically like a level 11 Wildfire Druid that conjures minor elementals, and then they get the bonus damage from being a Wildfire Wizard. And they point out, like, oh, well, this almost one-shot, or pretty much one-shot, an adult red dragon. And it's like, well, okay, that's true, except for the fact that the adult red dragon is immune to fire damage. And at the same time, so that right there, you can do it to another adult dragon with like an equal amount of hit points. So he's not entirely off base. But at the same time, like, why pick the red dragon? You know it's immune to fire. Like, you can just look in the book, that you have and see that it's immune to fire. And like, sometimes those combos are fun. Like, honestly, if a player did that at my table, I'd be like, yeah, you know what? Okay, great. Like, you found a combo or you knew about a combo beforehand. You did. Now, if they start doing that every single combat in order to cheese through the combat, that's when it becomes a problem. Because at that point, the player is not playing in good faith. In fact, at that point, I would say the player is pretty much metagaming. Because, it's not like their character is doing that because it's effective. The player is doing that because they want to, basically win at combat. And that's fine. And I think at that point, as a DM, I would probably talk with that player. And if it's something where, like, if they absolutely insist they keep doing on every combat, that's when you're going to start seeing those fire immune monsters show up. And I don't think, and not to, like, punish the player, but at the same time, when every combat is, wait for the wildfire to do its turn, conjure, minor elementals, do the extra fire damage, kill mostly everything in like one hit. That's not fun, and that's not fun for the other players either, because at that point, their turns are basically just waiting for the druid. But that's what I mean. Like, it's always been a game where you have to play in good faith, and it's the same thing. It works the other way too. It's like you don't want to have a DM that's trying to beat the player. You want a DM that challenges the player. And sometimes that means changing what you're doing in order to give that challenge to the players. Like, again, if the player's doing that and it's all based around that fire damage, you're going to start seeing fire resistant monsters, you're going to start seeing fire immune monsters. And that's, it's not that you're trying to punish the player, it's that you want the combat to be fun. Boring combat basically makes half of D&D boring. So again, like, people that are saying, like, the characters are overpowered, it's like, one, we don't know if because again, the monster manual is not out yet. The new monster manual is not out yet. And at the same time, it's like, if you have a player doing that, they're not playing in good faith. And you don't want players who don't play in good faith. It's the same thing with the edgelord that steals, makes the edgy loner rogue that, steals from the party. Or the player who makes the loner and then just doesn't want to do the quest. Because the whole premise of D&D is that you make a character that says yes to the adventure. And, the DM response to those is usually going to be, okay, your character doesn't want to go on an adventure, roll a new character who does want to go on this adventure. Like I did see a meme, and it's like, like all the players are invited to a gambling den, and and then it has the other character that's like, well, my character, takes the invitation and sells it to someone, and I go, okay, roll a character who's the person that you gave that invitation to. That's the answer right there, because at that point, he has established that this other character wants to go. They have the invitation. So that's going to be the character that they give it to. And they can make it anyone they want. They can roll a whole new character. Honestly, I would say even if they just want to take their current character and change the name, then that's fine too. So again, it's like when I see that kind of argument, I just kind of have to roll my eyes, because it's like this has always been a problem. I remember, like, when I was first getting into D&D, one of my friends directed me towards Spoonie's Crit Monkey series. And, it got to the point where, 5th edition came out, and he was ranting and raving about how 5th edition is terrible, and about how, like, death saving throws are stupid, because in the old edition, here's what happens when you get to 0 hit points. You die. And it's like, okay, but at the same time, it's like, you want this game to be fun, right? And don't get me wrong, there should be consequences for character death, but especially when you have a game where it's actually really easy to get players to 0 hit points, like, especially if you're a DM that's trying to beat the players and not play with the players. it's pretty easy to get a character down to 0. And that's where I think death saving throws are actually interesting, because it's not just, oh, you take the fatal when you die. It's like, no, you've taken enough damage, you're bleeding out, and you need to, stop bleeding out. And at the same time, it's like, again, it's like the appeal to realism. It's like, oh, you get to 0 hit points, you die. It's like, okay, but, any generic human being that, like, steps into a giant ball of fire or has one placed on them, they're just gonna die. Like, it's not about hit points. Like, do you want it to be real, or do you want it to be fun? So, like, I mean, and like, I think there's a place for games like that. Like, I think there's one, I'm trying to remember, Morkborg. Morkborg is one of those ones that I, saw the Dungeon News talk about. And from what I understand, it's one of those ones where it's like the players die really easy, because that's kind of like the point of the game. Like, it is one of those games where you're supposed to be able to play quickly. There are consequences, to player death. It's just that the consequences are more severe. And some players like that, and that's fine. Another good one is, the Alien RPG, TTRPG. And, that's another one where it's like, the players are kind of squishy, but at the same time, like, if they weren't, that's kind of defeats the premise of Alien. Like, the premise of Alien is you have this thing, and it is going to kill you easily if it corners you. So again, like, there's a place for that, but I think D&D is not that place. Like, D&D is it's a very fantastic game, in terms of, like, what it allows players to do. Like there's really high magic. Like, even when you play in a low magic setting, you can still make a wizard, and the wizard's still going to be able to do amazing things. But it's just that those amazing things aren't common. But it's also going to be again, it would be a really dull game if, you went to play at the table, rolled a wizard, and it's like, oh, well, no, wizards can't cast spells. Like, that defeats the purpose of being a wizard. Like, at that point, why didn't the DM say, hey, I don't want anyone rolling spellcasters? Which, again, is a boring game, because when you get down to it, who can you play if you're not a spellcaster? You can kind of play a barbarian, but even some of their things get really magic-y. Especially if it's things like the World Tree Barbarian. Like, that's very magic-y. You literally have a wild magic barbarian. So those would be off the table. You'd have fighters, and even then, not all fighters. You would have to get rid of the Eldritch Knight. You might have to get rid of the Psy Warrior if they consider those magic. You'd have rogues, and again, if those subclasses that have magic would not be playable, by this logic. And same thing with rangers. Like, imagine playing a ranger that doesn't get any spells. Who would want to play a ranger that doesn't have any spells? Like, their thing is that there's someone who shoots, but also has spells, and also can kind of wield weapons a little bit. So, like, again, like, I see that argument, and I just have to reject it outright. Like, at that point, I'd say you probably don't understand D&D if you're trying to make it super hyper-realistic. So there's that. And I also think that ignores a lot of the good stuff that the 2024 handbook does. Take something like exhaustion. Exhaustion used to suck. Just absolutely suck. It's like, 1 level of exhaustion isn't a huge deal. 2 level of exhaustion used to be a little more punishing. But, like, pretty much anything from, like, 3 onwards, it started to get bad really quick. To the point where it's like you have the old Berserker Barbarian that has the mechanic of, oh, when you use your core mechanic of Frenzy, you take a level of exhaustion. What fun is that? Because that pretty much means, like, maybe you'll Frenzy twice in a day. Maybe. Otherwise, you would just rage. And then that's not fun. Like, players shouldn't be punished for choosing a subclass. And that was a big problem in the old handbook, is so many things punish the players for making what is a baseline choice. If you choose a subclass, you certainly shouldn't be punished for choosing that subclass. If you choose a race, you should not be punished for choosing that race. I think the 2 worst races that Wizards of the Coast ever made are the Locatha, because it's basically you have to be in water at some point during the day for so many hours, or you die. And, don't get me wrong, I don't see a lot of people, like, looking to play, like, even, like, a modified Locatha. I'm sure they're out there. But at the same time, it's like, that's a sure way to make sure that players don't want to play that race. Like, when is that going to be useful? Okay, you play a high seas campaign. That's it. That's where the lookout is going to shine. And even then, a lot of their other stuff is very mid. So they're not going to want to play that either. And, at that point, just choose to be a Triton or a CL. Those are races that exist and they're a lot better. And then the other one is the Drow. The 2014 Drow is just terrible because it's like, okay, if you're in bright sunlight, you get disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks, and it's like, but that's when most people adventure. It's like, okay, like someone plays a Drow, and then they then have to convince the rest of the party that the time to adventure is going to be at night, when there's no sun, and it's like, why pigeonhole your players into that? Like, I don't get it. But of course, 2024 fixes that because they change exhaustion to where it's not as punishing. Like you still incur a penalty and you still don't want to get multiple stacks, but it's not going to be the end of the world until you get to that very end. Like, it's going to be one of those things where you have to make those, decisions very tactically. Same thing, and then of course the Berserk Barbarian doesn't even have the feature that's going to make it take exhaustion anyway, which is good, because again, why punish a player for playing a Berserker? Same thing with the Drought. They got rid of the, perception and attack penalties for being in sunlight, because again, why would you do that? Why, on God's green earth, would you punish a player for playing a Drought? Especially when you look at something like Baldur's Gate 3, where you can be an evil Drow or you could be a good Drow. And that's fine. Like, those should be valid, play styles. And so I think a lot of what this book does is it shores up those really heavy weak points. Same thing with the monk. It's like the monks used to suck. I mean, not that playing a monk was bad, but it was one of those things where the key economy was just absolutely terrible. It's like you play an elementalist, it's like, okay, you cast your 2 spells a day, or you cast your 2 elemental spells, you're out of key, take a long rest. Just even taking that and turning it into a short rest. And then on top of that, they also gave them abilities in this one that allowed them to get key points back, kind of like a wizard's arcane recovery. They even have an ability where, they can, when they roll initiative, they can regain all their key points, once per day. So it's one of those things where that's great because now the monk can do what the monk is supposed to do. The elementalist monk actually looks fun to play, like it has that Avatar The Last Airbender feel. And that's what you want. You don't want someone to look at a class or a subclass and go, okay, well, what's the point of this? Like what's the point of being a ranger? Like imagine they took, bows away from rangers. Like, let's say they said, okay, rangers can't use ranged weapons anymore. Like, okay, well then what's the point of being the ranger? Or let's say they took the fighter and said, okay, well, you're not going to get weapon masteries, you're not going to get maneuvers anymore. Like, okay, well then what's the point? So again, it's like I see all these, negative visuals, and again, I'm sure it's just the algorithm regurgitating, the negative input. It's the rage clicks that get that going. But I don't like it because I don't feel these are genuine arguments against the actual mechanics of the game. Because again, this is something to where the DM and the players should be working together. And that's why, even before the 2024 handbook, you would have DMs that said, you know what, go ahead and play Berserker, ignore the exhaustion mechanic. Frenzy whenever you want. That's going to be your thing. Or you would have DMs that would, change the monk subclass or when they get key points back. But at the same time, that stuff is not something that should be falling to the DMs or the players. That's something that the book should do, and that's something that this book does. So I honestly don't get why, they've given us, we're eating good. We have a lot of good stuff in this book, and people are complaining that now their subclass is at level 3 instead of 1. And you know what? I'm going to be a little rude here. Like, if you're complaining that your subclass is at level 3 and not level 1 now, Get over it. Just get over it. It's not a big deal. You're still going to have a god. You can still know what god or what patron or what lineage you have at level 1. That doesn't actually change. And you can talk, and again, like I said in my very first video of Let's Talk D&D, talk to your DM about it. Because your DM has to play your patron. They have to play, your god. If you encounter your ancestor because they're like this deity or this long-lived dragon, they have to roleplay them too. So it would actually probably be a really good thing if you chose this or already had in mind what subclass you want and who your patron or whatever is, so that they know what they can do with it. Because that makes it easier for them to weave it into the backstory. But that's not on Wizards of the Coast to choose who your patron is. That's on you and your DM. Talk to them and make the decision. You can make it at level 1, and then you just, it's just, okay, you're a dragon sorcerer. You just don't manifest your scales until, you've, used enough magic, from it. Or you know who your patron is, but, they give you the free trial. Or maybe you know who your god is, but, like, you have their power, but you just can't quite hear them yet because your faith isn't strong enough. These are all really easy answers to the subclass at level 3 problem. And I don't get why people are harping on it. It's like buying a new car. And you know what? Cars have problems all the time. Cars have design flaws. But there's a difference between a car having a problem that can be fixed by taking it into the dealer, like when there's a recall. And then there's a difference between that and having a Cybertruck that's going to break down when you wash it in, sunlight, or when it decides to stop and update, when you in it and it locks you in. Like, this is the thing. So that's the thing, is like, I look at 2014, and I would say even 2014 is not as bad as a Cybertruck. You can quote me on that. So Cryo says 2014, not as bad as a Cybertruck. But compared to the 2024 book, it's like a Cybertruck. There's all these problems with it. It's still a good game, but at the same time, it's like, it feels like you get punished for choosing a Cybertruck sometimes. But 2024 doesn't feel that way. 2024 is it's just a book where it's like, okay, you have to do normal car things. Like, you have to get the tires realigned. You have to get the oil changed and checked all the time. You want to make sure you wash it so that it doesn't get dirty. You want to top off all your fluids periodically. And that is all there is to it. So it's like 24, like, don't pretend like 2024 is the Cybertruck. 2024 is far from the Cybertruck. 2024 is a Toyota. Toyotas are generally good vehicles. And I mostly only know that because from my dad. And I've never heard anyone say they don't like Toyotas or that their Toyota was unreliable. This has been car talk. But yeah, so I mean, just like, maybe instead of like focusing on like the small negative things, we need to focus on the fact that so much has been fixed in this. And I really don't think that Wizards of the Coast, for all of their many, many flaws, is getting credit for that. And again, like, I don't want to get into politics of Wizards of the Coast. I want to talk about like the game itself. Like, if this was not made by Wizards of the Coast, it would still be a good game. Honestly, even the 2014 book is still a pretty solid game. It does have a lot more flaws, I grant you. But still, that hasn't stopped people from playing 5th edition D&D since 2014. So, give it a chance. Like if you're pondering about whether to buy the 2024 handbook, I do highly recommend it. I don't want to be the person that comes here and chills for Wizards of the Coast, but in terms of like what it actually is, 2024 D&D is a good game, and that is what I'm going to say about it. Until then, this is Cryo. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here because I don't know what much else I can say. I am doing this right before my vacation, so it should be ready on the Wednesday right after I come back. But at the same time, after this, I do plan on doing more roll call. It's just that roll call requires a lot more editing than something freeform like this, where like I might just have to cut out just a few things where stop and gather my thoughts. And you can probably see the edits on that. But until then, this is Sakurai saying, keep doing what makes you awesome. Hope you guys have a good one while I'm gone. Thank you very much, and goodbye.